Hey guys, today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in June. So before I get into the books that I did finish, I want to make a point to talk about Priory of the Orange Tree for a second. I am in the middle of reading this still. I was not able to finish it in June. I'm about just over 500 pages in, and it's about 850-ish, I believe, so getting there. And I will have a separate vlog talking about this book in the next week or so. I just couldn't get to it by the end of the month, and thus this wrap up, but I am really excited to talk about this one. So the first book that I did finish this month was An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This was sort of a rollover from May, but this is a first contact sci-fi story written by Hank Green. It focuses on a girl named April May who finds this strange statue in the middle of a New York City sidewalk, and no one else seems to really take note of it, but she thinks it's incredible, like a work of art, like some sort of statement piece or performance art, and she gets her friend to come down to the statue and they film like a YouTube video together, and she like pretends to interview the statue and names it Carl. Overnight, it sort of blows up because these Carls showed up in like 50 different huge cities around the world all at the same time. Inexplicably, they just appeared. And so humanity becomes really like focused in on like, what are these Carls? There's like no answers that anybody knows about it, and April's sort of the first person to have really interacted with one, and April's just as fascinated as everyone else is by these statues, and she really wants to be part of the narrative surrounding these Carls. She really works her whole identity around and creates a persona around April May and her relationship with the Carls, and becoming sort of a connection point between them and humanity, and eventually they kind of decide these are aliens. So it really just unravels from there, and April's life just totally blows up, and everything becomes about figuring out what these Carls are, and eventually all of humanity starts having these collective dreams in which they have to solve puzzles. This is concerning to a lot of people because how did these dreams start? How is everyone experiencing the same thing and able to work together to solve these puzzles? And what do they mean in the first place? Is Carl a bad presence? What effect is Carl going to have on humanity? And April's really optimistic about the Carls. She thinks that they're there to observe people, and yeah, so she really ends up kind of again at the center of this narrative. This is a duology, so it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. I did pick up the next book, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. Haven't finished it yet though, but I do really like it. Hank Green's writing was a little different for me to get used to. His writing has a very millennial voice, I would say, and especially the way he chose to portray his characters. And it's very different than anything else I've read, but I did enjoy it. Once I got used to it, it was just sort of getting used to the characters' quirks and personalities and stuff like that. So I did enjoy this, and I am planning to finish the second one soon and give my review of the duology as a whole, but I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up this month was Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna McGuire, and this is the 3rd book in her Wayward Children series. I've mentioned previously that I believe that these can be read standalone, but I personally wouldn't, as they all sort of connect and interact, and this one especially would spoil ones for the first one, Every Heart a Doorway, so do strongly recommend you read them in publication order. But this one focuses on a girl named Rainey who comes from a nonsensical kind of Candyland world, and she's looking for her mom, and she ends up bringing a couple of the other kids from the School for Wayward Children on an adventure and a quest through several other different worlds, trying to get back to her own and kind of solve this mystery that she's trying to figure out. And it was cute. Not my favorite in the story or in the series. The nonsense worlds, I think in general, just like don't appeal to me quite as much as the more logical ones do. But it was really cute, and I did like the Candyland setting that they eventually felt like wound up in. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. I liked it, just not my favorite in the series so far. The next book I read this month, which I actually don't have on hand because I lent it to a friend, is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was my 3rd Taylor Jenkins Reid book because I've read Daisy Jones and the Six and Malibu Rising, and probably my favorite so far. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I really liked the historical fiction aspect of it and like the Hollywood setting. I thought it was a really interesting narrative about sort of the sacrifices famous people had to make about their own identity, especially sort of in this more like golden age of Hollywood. Evelyn struggles a lot with not being able to be truly like or true to herself in a variety of ways. And I don't want to speak too much about it because I think it is a little bit of a spoiler to go into it much deeper than that. The structure of the story is set up around this woman named Monique Grant in present day, and she's a reporter working for like an entertainment magazine, and she's basically requested by this really famous woman, Evelyn Hugo, who was like the biggest actress in the world at one point, to do a story on Evelyn's life. She's in her like 70s or 80s now, and she's been out of the public eye for a while, and she's never given a tell-all about her life, which is really interesting because she has had 7 husbands, as the title suggests. And a lot of people are very curious as to how this all kind of unraveled, who was the true love of her life. She's been very secretive about sort of the more gossipy elements of her life. So Monique sets out to find out, you know, everything that's going on with Evelyn in her life. And when she does actually meet Evelyn, Evelyn kind of turns it around and says, actually, I want you to write my biography. Which would be huge for Monique, but she's also like, why did Evelyn choose me? Because she's sort of like not a huge reporter. She's not a big renowned writer by any means. So it really focuses on the mystery of Evelyn's life and how things unraveled the way they did and why. And it was so good. And it was a very like transportive novel. I loved the parts that obviously went back into Evelyn's life, and you saw like how everything unfolded, and it was just so good. Taylor Jenkins Reid has this really unique element to her writing that just like makes you feel so connected and like you're there, and it was so good. So loved this one, gave it a 5 out of 5. Not an unpopular opinion. This is sort of an internet darling at this point, but yeah, strongly recommend. It was good. The next book I picked up was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I have not read his other book, which is really big, called The Silent Patient, but I have heard good things about it. So when I saw this was coming out, I was really intrigued. This has kind of like a dark academia thriller element to it, so I was really intrigued. I don't read a lot of thrillers, but I had a lot of fun with this one, trying to kind of like guess the twists and stuff. And at one point, I was just convinced everyone was the killer. And so that's fun every now and then to do. So this takes place at Oxford University, and it follows a string of murders, and all the young women who have been murdered are part of this group called the Maidens, and they're like basically this Greek professor's favorite students, and they're all female. So the main character, Mariana, is like a group therapist, and her niece attends this school, so she's obviously worried about her niece, and she's like real sketched out by this, like the concept of the Maidens in general. It's just kind of like a creepy concept. And Mariana recently lost her husband, so her niece is like the only family she has left, and she's really committed to trying to figure out like who the murderer is. This one was fun. Again, I had a lot of fun trying to kind of figure out who did it and whatnot leading up to the final act of the book, and it was a really fast read, but it wasn't quite as shocking as I wish it had been. I think the best twists are the ones that had a lot of breadcrumbs that you just miss, and I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil this, but I felt like the ending, like he was trying really hard to make it a twist, and it just didn't have like the build up to make it feel satisfying. So I struggled with that a bit, but I did like the atmosphere of this book. Again, the Oxford setting was really cool and like creepy. If you're into dark academia and Oxford as a setting for a thriller, then I think you'd probably like this. I believe I gave this like a 3.5 just because, again, I have a hard time being satisfied by thrillers. And if it doesn't live up to my expectations, I end up a little disappointed, but this was pretty good, and I am looking forward to reading The Silent Patient eventually. I did like it enough to want to read his backlog, so yeah, I liked this one. The next book I read this month was Howls Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, and I actually have a whole video comparing and talking about sort of the differences between the book and the movie adaptation for this. But this was such a delightful reread. I first read this book, I think about 10 years ago. I was in high school and I'd grown up with the movie, so it's a story that's like familiar, but the book just is so much more whimsical, and I love this book so much. It's probably one of my favorite, like, I don't want to say childhood because that makes it seem like a middle grade, but it's really more of like a young adult. This is just one of my favorite books from my youth, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. And if you don't know, this book follows a young woman named Sophie Hatter in this magical world of Ingery where wizards are sort of the norm, and Sophie ends up accidentally crossing paths with this woman named the Witch of the Waste, who's rather evil, and the Witch of the Waste turns her into an old woman. And Sophie has always kind of been not super ambitious. She's the eldest child of 3, and she's kind of resolved herself to a simple life because eldest children just don't ever get anything magical or exciting in their lives. But with this curse that she's had put on her, she realizes she has to kind of go out in the world and figure out how to solve this because she can't stay. Her stepmother would freak out. So she ends up kind of going out into the countryside and coming across Wizard Howl's moving castle. And Wizard Howl is a bit of a rake. It's rumored that he is heartless and he eats young women's hearts, and really he's just kind of a player. He courts a lot of young ladies, and as soon as they fall in love with him, he gets bored and moves on. But he is a really effective wizard. So he has a castle that roams the countryside in Ingery, but his castle also has sort of a door with several portals into other cities within the kingdom, as well as a mysterious one that leads to the land of Wales. But this book is just such a delight, and Sophie in Howl's just dynamic is so fun. If you've seen the movie, Howl is kind of like a gentleman. He's very calm most of the time. He is a big old brat in this book with a lot of sass, and him and Sophie just have it out so often, and it's really entertaining. So if you like fantasy at all, I would definitely recommend this book. It is a young adult, so it's a little more like whimsical, but it's so good. And if you've only seen the movie, definitely recommend reading the book because I think there's just so much there to just be delighted by. It's very different, especially in the last half from the movie, but I think I like the book a little bit better. So gave this one a 5 out of 5. This was a delightful reread. Next up, I have a few graphic novels, starting with The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is a new release, and it's a sapphic love story between a young girl named Morgan and a Selkie named Katie. And it's so cute. It's the cutest dang thing I've ever read. The illustrations in this book are just so delightful and adorable, and it follows Morgan, and she's 15 years old, and she is starting to realize that she likes girls, but like feels like she can't tell her friends about it, or her family even. Her parents have recently gone through a really brutal divorce, and so she's just feeling like really withdrawn. One night she accidentally falls into the sea, and she's saved by this Selkie named Katie, and Morgan is like convinced it's a dream, so as a thank you, she gives Katie a kiss. This kiss allows Katie to come on land and shed her seal skin, and she's really excited to get to know Morgan a little bit better, and she also has something that she needs to ask Morgan to help her with her seal family, basically. And this is just, again, the cutest thing. It's a really cute, like, sort of coming of age story and sort of discovering yourself kind of story, and it gave me the warm fuzzies. I read this in one sitting. It does look like a bit of a longer graphic novel, but it's a really fast read, and I believe I gave this 5 out of 5 because it was just so delightful. Following that, I read Poison Ivy Thorns, which is also a newer release. This is from DC's young adult graphic novel line. and it's an origin story for Poison Ivy. If you don't know, her real name is Pamela Isley, and I'm not super familiar with her character beyond this, so I don't know if her like original origin story is a bit different. But in this novel, Pamela is living at home with her dad. Her mom has been away for a while, and so she is trying to take care of all the things her mom loves, such as their garden and the greenhouse at her school. And her dad is starting to become a little bit unhinged, and this book really kind of delves into why, and you find out he's experimenting on Pamela for some reason, and it's starting to give her these strange powers. This is also sapphic. There's a bit of a love story with a girl at her school, and Pamela is just really battling men wanting various things from her that she doesn't want to give anymore, whether it be her dad or boys at school, and this is really about her kind of finding her independence from all of that and standing up for herself, and this was really good. I've liked Poison Ivy as a character for a while. I've never really like gone and read a graphic novel solely about her, so this was a lot of fun. I also really liked the art style of this. It's got a lot of like greens and reds, obviously those are her colors. And yeah, so this was also a really fast, interesting read. It's got kind of like a gothic feel to it because she lives in kind of a creepy mansion. And yeah, so I definitely liked this one. I gave it 4 out of 5, and I recommend it if you're curious about her character at all or want to maybe dip your toes into DC comics, but you're not really quite sure where to start. This one stands on its own pretty well. I also finally picked up Teen Titans Raven by Cami Garcia, and this was pretty cute. It's also a DC young adult graphic novel, and I believe they're doing a whole series for the Teen Titan like origins and stuff now. The first one is Raven, the second one is Beast Boy, and I believe the third one was announced to be like a Beast Boy and Raven one, but I believe they're going to be going into the other characters. I first heard about this because I follow the illustrator on Instagram, and I have for a while, and he's done a lot of Teen Titans fan art, so it's really cool to see that like he's now actually working for DC illustrating Teen Titans stories. I was really happy for him when that worked out. But yeah, so this is again an origin story for the character of Raven. In the very beginning, she ends up getting into a car accident with her foster mom, and her foster mom unfortunately passes away. And so she goes to live with her foster mom's sister in New Orleans, and she has no memory of anything before the accident. She doesn't remember really who she is or what caused the accident, but she's starting to realize she has these kind of strange powers. She thinks something and they start to happen, and this obviously freaks her out. She thinks she's going crazy because like that's not normal, but she does eventually start to kind of recover her memories. This has a really cool setting in New Orleans if you're into sort of like the witchcraft stuff and like graveyards and ghosts and stuff. That this is a cool setting for that. And it was a really interesting start to what is hopefully a cool series. I'm excited to read the Beast Boy one. I've always loved his character, and continue this story. It's really cute, so I gave it 4 out of 5. The last graphic novel I read this month was Volume 5 of Saga, and if you've been here a while, you've probably seen me talk about this series before. It's one of my favorite graphic novel series at the moment. Definitely for like mature audiences only. There is a lot of violence and a lot of graphic images. Would not suggest this for younger kids or younger teenagers. And I can't talk too much about what happens in this specific volume because I don't want to spoil the previous ones. And Saga as a whole follows 2 people who are from warring planets, basically, and their war has spilled out sort of into the rest of the galaxy and affected several other planets and peoples. These 2 specifically are from the planet Landfall and its moon Wreath, and they've just been bitter enemies for generations. But they find, it's like a Romeo and Juliet story, you know, forbidden lovers and all, and they end up pregnant with a baby named Hazel. And Hazel sort of narrates the story in a like retrospective sort of way, which I really enjoy, and I love their relationship and their little family unit, and it's really them against the rest of the galaxy because no one wants to see these 2 together. They think it's an abomination and that their baby's an abomination, and so they're just kind of constantly on the run and trying to find a home for their little family. And I really like this series so far. I'm just over halfway through what is currently out at the moment. There's 9 volumes, I believe, but it's on hiatus at the moment. So I'm really excited to get to the rest of this eventually. I've been sort of slowly crawling through it because I don't want it to end, but I am hoping to actually finish it soon because I feel so behind. But yeah, so I give this one 4 out of 5. Wasn't my favorite of the series so far, but we are sort of in the middle of it at the moment, so they're not quite as remarkable as the first couple have been, but they're still really good, and I really love the art style in these graphic novels. And finally this month, I read The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary, which is a contemporary romance book. I needed a bit of a break from some of the heavier stuff, and in the middle of Priory, the really dense fantasy setting was getting to me a little bit, and I needed a quick breath of fresh air, so a contemporary romance usually does that for me. And The Flat Share specifically is about a young woman named Tiffy who is just getting out of a long, emotionally abusive relationship with her ex, and because she's really desperate to get away from him, she ends up finding a flat for really cheap, and it's a really nice flat, but instead of them having their own separate rooms, her and her roommate have to share a bed. He's a hospice nurse who works overnight, so they have complete opposite shifts, and they never actually meet. But Tiffy and Leon, her roommate, end up starting to leave notes for each other around the flat, and baked goods and dinner and stuff. So they start to form this friendship over notes, and you get to know each of their backstories a little bit. And I will say this romance novel deals with some heavier topics, such as the aforementioned emotional abuse. And Leon is also having to deal with a brother who is sort of unjustly incarcerated, and he's really working to get him free from prison. They really start to take solace in each other and again build this friendship just through notes, and so there's a lot of lead up to them actually meeting face to face, and I quite liked this one, again, where they were able to kind of delve into these heavier topics. I think that's hard for romances to do and still have an emotionally satisfying sort of romantic element as well. But I really enjoyed this novel, and I will say the writing style for Leon's point of view chapters was really off-putting at first. The book and the story kind of emphasize that he is a man of few words, but even his internal monologue is it feels clipped. And that was hard for me to get used to because Tiffy's chapters weren't written like that at all. Leon's chapters were written like he was taking notes for himself almost. And there were even there weren't any quotation marks when he was having dialogue with someone. It was written kind of in script format. So that might be off-putting to some people, and I think because of that, I gave it a 3 out of 5, just because his chapters annoyed me so much, and it sucks when half of a romance book is annoying to read. So I did like this story otherwise, though, so that one was a 3 out of 5. All right, and that wraps up my reading for June. I feel like I didn't read quite as much this month. I did read quite a few graphic novels, which felt good because I put those off sometimes. And Priory has just taken up so much of my reading time lately, and I've also been a little bit busier now that it's summer, but I still do feel good about what I was able to read this month. And I don't think I had any big duds this month, so that feels good too. Let me know down in the comments below what you read this month. If you've read any of this stuff, let me know what you think. Feel free to follow my socials down in the description box below. Subscribe, all that, and have a wonderful day. Bye.